for your business, 6 figures and above, go to firstlibertyga.com, firstlibertyga.com. Thanks to them for their sponsorship. Y'all, I've got a series of stories that I want to string together this morning. I will take your phone calls as well. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I gotta begin, though, with a series of stories. I guess I've been doing this for a decade. I can consider myself a professional in talk radio. Maybe. I don't know. But I got a bunch of different stories, and I got to string them together. The first of which might be the most difficult for some of you to deal with, but I urge you to stick with me on this. How many of you, I actually don't think it's my audience, thankfully. Y'all are smart and sophisticated people. But we know that these people exist. I bet you know someone who believes that the Dominion voter system machines were throwing votes from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. Now, we've had people call this program who asserted that the Dominion voter system machines, that there are ties to the Venezuelan government and possibly China, and that they were throwing votes to Joe Biden. There was an ongoing conspiracy with Dominion voter systems, Smartmatic, and others to steal the election for Joe Biden. Sidney Powell promised a kraken. She said that the proof was forthcoming, that they had the documented evidence, they had the experts here in Georgia, where I am. Members of the state legislature in Georgia, in the state Senate, held hearings on the Dominion voter system machines and how they were, in fact, hackable, and they were, in fact, throwing the vote to Joe Biden. You had supposed voting rights activists sending out press releases and supposed affidavits claiming proof, claiming local election officials certified that the results were being thrown to Joe Biden. You had videos put up supposedly showing the Dominion voter system machines doing it. And behind the scenes, Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others talking about the ongoing conspiracy of Dominion voter systems to steal the election on behalf of Venezuela, China, Iran, Russia, who knows who else, for Joe Biden. Sidney Powell has been sued by Dominion voter systems for her allegations against Dominion voter systems. It's a $1 billion lawsuit. She tried to avoid service. She was served nonetheless. She has filed a motion to dismiss their case. Do you know what her basis is? Some of you may be thinking, well, truth. She said she had the evidence. She knows Dominion voter systems on behalf of the Venezuelan government as payback for Donald Trump's efforts to get rid of Maduro, used the machines to steal the election for Joe Biden. She had that. She's got all this information, she says. She's got witnesses and documentation. The truth will set her free. The truth is the ultimate defense against defamation. Surely that is her defense. Except it's not. I have read the court filing myself. Sidney Powell's defense is that no reasonable person could conclude, these are her words in her statement, or in the motion to dismiss, no reasonable person could conclude that the claims made were truly statements of fact. That's right. Sidney Powell, having made these claims, having had many people embarrass themselves by embracing these claims, is now saying that no reasonable person would have ever believed she was telling the truth. So you need to tell your friends this, your friends who believe that the Dominion voter system machines were stealing the election for Joe Biden, according to Sidney Powell, no reasonable person could believe those claims. Now, there's another story. Just bear with me. I'm stringing these stories together here. I'm a professional. I think I can do this. Sidney Powell says no reasonable person could have believed that the Dominion voter system machines were throwing the election to Joe Biden, despite her claims. Multiple members of Congress, state legislators, the President of the United States, more embraced that claim. Now, the Democrats, the whole time, were saying this isn't true. This is nonsensical. And you know what? I was saying it too. People are saying, oh, well, you're a never-Trumper rhino Democrat because you didn't believe Sidney Powell. Well, Sidney Powell says I'm reasonable because I didn't believe it. Only unreasonable people would believe those claims now. But the Democrats were saying that we got to defend the Electoral College. We got to stand up for elections. When a state certifies an election, we cannot overturn those elections. When you've got a state certified election, the government must uphold that election. We can't throw out or undermine or undo state laws like Republicans wanted, like Donald Trump wanted to steal an election. You're not allowed to do that, say the Democrats. In Iowa's 2nd Congressional District, there was an election. The Republican won by 6 votes. 21 or 22 absentee ballots were rejected. Had those 20 absentee ballots been accepted, the Democrat would have won. Those absentee ballots were rejected by bipartisan review panels for non-compliance with state law. One of them, the woman had taped the ballot into the absentee ballot, which is against the law in Iowa. Others left off material information or improperly handled the ballot. State law in Iowa says you can't count those ballots. They were rejected by bipartisan panels. The Democrat could have appealed to court, but the Democrat didn't do that. The Democrat instead has taken it to the House of Representatives and said you should put me in, not the Republican, and the Democrats are going to oblige the effort. Thus far, only 2 Democrats have come out and said we can't do this given what we just said about the presidential election, but Nancy Pelosi wants to do it. The House Administration Affairs Committee wants to steal the election. It's a state-certified election. The Democrats said you can't touch a state-certified election. They're going to. The Democrats said you can't throw out state law. You can't undo elections like Donald Trump wanted. They're going to. All of the Republicans who could make a moral case against doing this were believing Sidney Powell's lies and claiming that we had to throw out the presidential election because Dominion Voter System's algorithm was throwing the election for Joe Biden. They don't have a moral ground to stand on to defend our republic because, according to Sidney Powell, they weren't reasonable people because they believe Sidney Powell. But all the Democrats who said you can't throw out a state-certified election are now about to change their mind. It's operational, situational ethics. It all depends on who's in charge and who can get power. That's how they define their ethics. They don't care about the truth. Joe Biden's campaign team, we talked about this the other day, they're out blaming Donald Trump for the situation at the border, saying Donald Trump pulled out all the stops. Donald Trump undermined the border. Donald Trump made immigration worse. All the illegal aliens who are coming up saying, oh, we would have never come if Donald Trump were here, but we're coming because Joe Biden said we could come. I played you audio on this program, Martha Raddatz on ABC News interviewing an illegal alien at the border saying he and his family would never have come if Donald Trump were still president. Even the Washington Post says, and this is a quote, Biden administration officials have been plagued by muddled messaging, sometimes making appeals that seem directed more at liberal activists than the migrants. The situation is objectively worse than when Donald Trump was president, and that's when the Democrats said they were concentration camps. The Democrats said these were concentration camps. The Democrats inspired, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez inspired a man to firebomb an ICE facility to stop the concentration camps, and the situation is worse now, and she hasn't said a damn thing about it. Because the Democrats are in charge. It turns out in Atlanta, the shooter was not a white supremacist. He was a horny sociopath who was overwhelmingly tempted by Asian massage parlors to go have sex and decided he needed to kill them all to stop the temptation. But undeterred from the truth of the situation, left-wing activists are protesting anti-Asian violence, claiming it's a hodgepodge of white supremacy, anti-Asian propaganda over COVID, and the Trump administration that all conspired to lead to the shooting in Atlanta. When the FBI director came out and said, nope, racial animus had nothing to do with the shooting, as far as we can tell, Raphael Warnock, this newest senator from Georgia, went on Meet the Press and said, we can see the hate. I don't care what the FBI director says. 3 months ago, when Donald Trump was president, how dare you question the FBI? And now, if the FBI throws truth at you that violates your critical race theory worldview, you're allowed to denounce the FBI director. These stories are completely separate. Sidney Powell and the Republicans, they are slightly tied to the Democrats in Iowa, is not tied to the border situation, is not tied to the Atlanta shooting situation, but there is one thing that runs through them all. A lack of willingness to embrace the actual truth of the situations. A willfulness to reject truth. Next week, 3 billion people on planet Earth will meditate on, unless they're Orthodox Christians, they'll put it off for a few weeks. But roughly 3 billion Christians will focus on that week in human history where the world decided to execute truth. Actual, real truth, the way, the life. They couldn't do it then, but they seem very committed to doing it now. In 1 Timothy 4, the Apostle Paul wrote, have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. It's real hard to tell people, hey, China and Venezuela collaborated with Dominion voter systems to steal the election by using an algorithm to shift votes to Joe Biden. Oh, and also, let me tell you about my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. When you start peddling myths and lies as truth, the real truth becomes harder to deliver. The real truth becomes harder to find. The real truth becomes harder on which to build a foundation. It becomes really hard. Democrats and Republicans, for various reasons alike, seem committed to ignoring the truth. They seem committed to doing everything possible to avoid engaging what actually happened. Reality no longer matters. You know, in critical theory, in postmodernism, the left believes that your words shape reality. There is no objective reality. That's why you can have your truth and my truth. That's why people can take all of the facts about the shooter in Atlanta and still say it was anti-Asian white supremacy hate. Because the truth doesn't matter. Their feelings matter. But the truth has to matter. And by the way, I think there's a real opening here for Republicans, for conservatives. Because increasingly the truth doesn't matter on the left. It is my truth and your truth. It is moral relativism. It is situational ethics. It is woko haram. The right has a real opportunity to persuade the middle to persuade the mass of people who still recognize there are actually real true things in life, that the left has lost its way. But the only way to do that is to stop believing myths and stop believing lies. Sidney Powell, through her lawyers under oath in federal court, is asking for the case against her filed by Dominion Voter Systems to be thrown out, claiming that no reasonable person could have believed the stuff she said. That's her defense. That the claims were so outlandish, no reasonable person could have believed her. And yet the President of the United States did, multiple members of Congress did, state legislators did, even people listening to me right now did. And she's saying you're all fools. That you are so unreasonable, she can't be blamed for you believing her. That's her defense. Her defense is not that it was true. Her defense is that you're idiots for believing her. And a lot of people did believe her. You cannot persuade people that our side is right if we're not going to embrace truth. Truth still matters. It matters to defend this race in Iowa. It matters to push back against the hateful claims of Democrats. It matters in dealing with the border. Truth must be paramount to our existence and our conversations.
He doesn't just have a radio show. Eric has a
Hello and welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Glad to have you with me. Happy to take your phone calls on this. Do y'all like processed meats? You know, this is one of the most profound things. Have you heard of Impossible Foods? There's the Beyond Meat people. There's the Impossible Foods people. And they make these synthetic vegetable-based meat, synthetic meats. And then, of course, there's Spam, and there's the deli meats you get at the grocery store. All of this effort, particularly with the Impossible brands and the Beyond Meat brands, there is this entire idea that it's better for the environment if we stop eating meat. Now, keep in mind that we have this long scientific, well-settled history now, subject to revision in science and in dietary food, etc., that that you need to eat less processed food. And the most processed food out there right now are these Beyond Burgers and Impossible Meats, where they use essentially hemoglobin, synthetic hemoglobin, to give it a mouthy, meaty feel. And I've got friends who have eaten it and said that it tastes just like meat. Okay, go ahead and eat it. That's fine. But there's new research from the United Kingdom. The study finds a link between greater consumption of processed meats and higher rates of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. Also, there's a possible link between eating unprocessed meats and a lower risk of dementia. So if you eat, for example, the Omaha Steaks package, you may actually be lowering your risk of dementia, but you eat the processed synthetic food and you may be increasing your risk of dementia. So keep that in mind. This is a perfect way for me to talk about Omaha Steaks. In fact, if you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar, you will get the Butcher's Bestsellers package. Y'all, you're going to get pork chops, you're going to get fillets, you're going to get kielbasa sausages, you're going to get burgers, you're even going to get dessert and seasoning, and you're going to get 4 free chicken breasts and 4 free burgers. What you do is you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar, and you will see the Butcher's Bestsellers package. If you order it, you're going to get 4 free chicken breasts and 4 free burgers. Now, I love their burgers because if you go to the grocery store, you get just ground chuck and you hand form the patties at home. They shrink up. You're supposed to put the little notch or hole in the middle, the divot, so that they don't shrink up as much. The Omaha Steaks blend, it's a great blend of very beefy flavor. It doesn't shrink up on the grill. It's fantastic. What you do is go to omahasteaks.com. You put Georgia in the search bar, get the package. You'll get 4 free burgers, 4 free chicken breasts to go with the deal. It's fantastic.
777 now.
Hello, welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. There was a tragic shooting in Colorado. 10 people, it appears, have been killed in a grocery store. The Boulder Police Department said an officer who was killed in the shooting, his name was Eric Talley. He's 51 years old, had been on the police force since 2010. King Supers is the name of the gun store. The suspect is in custody, being treated. And we're expecting further updates today. Some of the people who were killed, it appears, had gone in and were in line to get their vaccine. It was a sad situation. It has made headlines across the country today. A week from the shooting in Atlanta, the number of mass shooter events went down during the lockdowns. The number of actual gun fatalities went up, a lot of them suicide. And now this. Now, here's the thing. I want to read you one of the subtitles. Actually, I'll read you all the subtitles for proper context at the New York Times right now on March 23rd, 9:37 a.m. Eastern Time. 10 people are killed in shooting at Colorado grocery store. Subheadline 1. Here's what we know about the shooting. Subheadline 2. The officer who died was identified as Eric Talley. He was the first to respond to the scene. Subheadline 3. Signs of a partisan divide on guns reemerged hours after the shooting. All right. So immediately, this happens every day. This happened last week in Atlanta. The left immediately rushed out anti-Asian violence. And then rushed out, got to do guns. Gun control. We need gun control. Raphael Warnock came out and said that we gotta make an exception to the filibuster for civil rights. It's voting. Well, now maybe guns too. All of the exceptions that they want to get rid of the filibuster. They're pressuring Joe Manchin, who thus far doesn't seem to budge. They've moved Dianne Feinstein, who's willing to say you got to have a talking filibuster, which actually grinds the Senate to a halt, which is interesting. So maybe that's the compromise, but we shouldn't have to compromise on this issue. So this is where we are now. That the left has decided, and this hasn't changed, but now the Democrats are back in power. They've got everything. So it becomes a real effort now to move the needle. Every time something happens in this country that the left thinks they can weaponize politically, they're going to do it. We've got a tragedy in Colorado, and we are not 4 hours removed from the tragedy in Colorado, and you've already got people out there screaming, gun control, we need gun control. And you notice what never gets covered, what never gets talked about, whether it's this situation. We don't know all the facts yet from the Colorado situation. We don't really have any statements of motive yet. But we do from the Atlanta shooting now. And one of the things that never gets talked about is mental health. We always rush in to have conversations about gun control, and we never talk about mental health. And what's so interesting here is that the people on the left always say, well, that's all you want to talk about. You don't want to talk about guns. You just want to talk about mental health. Why do you want to talk about mental? Well, because, you tend to be a crazy person when you're going to load up weapons and go kill a bunch of people. And yet we don't want to have these conversations. We certainly don't want to have conversations about the mental health effects of lockdowns. It seems like everyone wants to avoid that. What are the mental health effects of the lockdown? Got to have that conversation. No one wants to have it. There's another conversation that we should be having too. And a number of you reached out to me after yesterday's show and said, what about Pornhub? What about it? What about Pornhub? The mass move towards lockdowns and staying at home and young men home alone delving into pornography and porn culture, the sexualization and exploitation of women, the instant self-gratification in pornography, what it does to your mind, what it does to your relationships. This guy in Atlanta, notice what we're having a conversation about anti-Asian hate now. We're not actually having conversations about pornography and sex. I got blasted by people yesterday for pointing out that this guy, according to his roommates, was going to these places for sex. That a lot of Asian-themed massage parlors, and I don't know if these three actually were, but a lot of them tend to actually be brothels. And in fact, there's ample evidence that a lot of these places engage in human trafficking. And we can't have these conversations because, well, we don't know about these three places and we don't want to cast aspersions on them. We need to be polite, but then we never have the conversation. We never have the conversation about pornography. In fact, the hypersexualization of society is upon us. And the left seems to think it's a good thing. You've gone from the days where feminists and conservatives were aligned on porn being bad to a lot of these current hairy armpitted feminists believing that it's actually empowering for women to take control of their body, that we should legalize prostitution and pornography is a good thing because it empowers women. But it doesn't really. What does it empower the woman to do? To help a guy unburden himself sexually alone. That makes you proud. These are the difficult conversations that we should be having as a society right now, but we can't because we got to have the gun control conversation yet again. And now, of course, they tie it to the filibuster that, if only we can get rid of the filibuster, we got to get rid of the filibuster because the filibuster, it's an institution of racism. Apparently, Elizabeth Warren, Chief Wampum herself, is a racist because she's used the filibuster. And now she says the filibuster is the vestige of racism that she herself used. It's all racism. We got to scream about racism, anti-Asian racism, bigotry, anti-transphobia, gun control. Let's not talk about mental health. We need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about the effects of the fallout, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just really remarkable that we seem held hostage by the conversations the left wants to have, and in large part because they are culturally dominant right now and control much of the mainstream media narrative. So we got to have the gun control conversation yet again because that's what they want. But there really aren't a lot of voices on the right now out there that say, wait a second, we need to talk about mental health from lockdowns, and we need to talk about the rampant pornography. We need to talk about, whether it was these three or not. We know there is a problem in this country with these massage parlors tending to be not just places for prostitution, but also for human trafficking. We can't have those conversations because that's anti-Asian. Apparently, if you're Asian, you're allowed to do that, and we should be supportive of it. There are all sorts of conversations that must be had and can't be had because there really aren't any good voices in conservatism right now in the media willing to point out that there are things that are being left out of the conversation that need to be talked about. Who cares that you want to talk about gun control? It's not actually going to happen, but these things could happen because there actually does tend to be some level of bipartisan consensus on mental health. We just don't want to talk about it because we can't fundraise off it. But the left can fundraise off guns, and so can the right. Both sides profit off of talking about guns. It whips up both sides. Mental health, both sides, frankly, have lots of people who are at home watching porn. So you can't talk about that. You're a prude. You're a conservative evangelical. You're probably a closeted gay or some such. All the excuses they throw at you when you want to bring up these conversations. And yet these are conversations that still have to be had. It's amazing how the devil works to try to shame the people who want to have the relevant conversations about these sorts of issues that are directly impacting society. You bring them up, somehow you're the bad guy. And so we never bring them up, and the situations rinse and repeat. Somebody's got to bring them up. Instead, gun control. Here's Anna Palmer on CNN.
This was obviously planned before any of this happened, but I think it also just underscores the fact that this is a national crisis that continues to happen. Senate Democrats are trying to push forward with this, but the way that Congress works, there's a majority in the House that would support moving forward with gun control of some kind. But in the Senate, there is not that 60-vote threshold. And that's why I really think this filibuster, again, is going to come under fire, because you're going to see a lot of activists and others say, this, if not now, when? If not now, when? Well, you're not going to have it unless they get rid of the filibuster. I don't think Joe Manchin will do it on gun rights. I don't think he will. Yeah, this is also why the Republicans have to be very, very careful about 2022 and the fighting in Georgia, because you got to get rid of Warnock, and the GOP needs a good candidate. You need good candidates around the nation. The majority, I think all of the senators who have announced retirement are Republican. The Republicans are going to have to sweep because they're on defense in 2022. And while all of this is happening, of course, the anti-Asian discourse continues to be out there as if it was what was involved in Atlanta. Notice how the Atlanta shooting, once it turned out that it wasn't anti-Asian racism, most of the media immediately ran from the story. But the Asian activists are still out there. Here's one Asian rights activist who was on, what's that? It's some left-wing free speech channel on satellite TV.
Do you think what happened in Atlanta has to be immediately labeled as, and the alleged shooter charged with, hate crimes?
I certainly think so. But again, it was shocking to me to read yesterday in The Guardian that Christopher Wray, the FBI director, has said that it's not conclusive that this was a racially motivated crime. And the Reverend Raphael Warnock immediately said, no, it is a hate crime. When we're looking at this targeted attack targeted against Asian massage parlors, in which 6 of the 8 victims were Asian women who were deliberately tracked down, it looks like a hate crime. It smells like a hate crime. It is a hate crime. And I think overwhelmingly the Asian American population of this country believes that.
Overwhelmingly, the Asian American population of this country believes that it was a hate crime. Tammy Duckworth, Senator.
Well, from where I sit, I want to see a deeper investigation into whether or not these shootings and other similar crimes are racially motivated. It looks racially motivated to me, but I'm not, I'm not a police officer. I'm not investigating the crimes. What I have done, though, is I have actually sent a letter to Director Wray and to Attorney General Garland asking for a deeper investigation into crimes that involve Asian Americans, to see how many crimes have actually been underreported as hate crimes. We know that crimes against Asian Americans that have been categorized as hate crimes have increased by over 150% in our nation's major cities. That's over 3,800 additional crimes last year. But we also know that many of these crimes go underreported as hate crimes and are just classified as a mugging or harassment or vandalism, when they were targeted at Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in particular.
Can I just say that, have you noticed, this is one point, this is essentially becoming a pet peeve of mine, and I know that it shouldn't be. But you can't just say Asian Americans now. You've got to say Pacific Islanders as well. It's no longer just the LGB community, it's the LGBT, and then it's the LGBTQ community, then it's the LGBTQIA community, then the LGBTQIA plus community. That in our efforts to include everyone so no one's feelings get hurt, we've taken a sentence that could be 10 words and it's got to be expanded by like 115. It's nuts. And everyone, we can't, what about me? What about me? What about me? Well, I got to include my group. I got to include my group. Really? Really? This is where, the insanity of intersectionalism and all that. This is where we get. You've got every group's got to be part of it, so no group's feelings get hurt. The whole thing is just kind of silly, and that's where we are now. And then this other idea here from Tammy Duckworth that Asian hate crimes against Asian American and Pacific Islanders is on the rise. Yes, overwhelmingly in the black community. That is a relevant part of the narrative as the Democrats continue to try to push the idea this is all white supremacy. The data, the federal data from even the Biden administration shows that it's not white supremacy. But you can't talk about that. Why? Not because it's not true, but because it goes against the prevailing media orthodoxy and narrative. The narrative is way more important than the truth to these people.
News and in-depth analysis from
Hello there. I would like to file a human resources complaint. My producer he's got a finger in the air at me, and he's not even in my studio, and I can feel it. I can feel what he's directing my way, and it makes me feel bad. I am my own producer. I'm just annoying him. All right. We got to get to the phone calls. Cliff is calling from Warner Robins. Cliff, first, Cliff, I want to welcome you to the program, and we got time here for me to hijack this conversation for a minute. I was in Warner Robins, Georgia, the other day. Well, for those of you who don't know the state, it's south of Macon, got an Air Force base, and Cliff, every time I go to Warner Robins, it's like there's a new strip mall. What is going on down there?
It's just growing, and some of them.
I mean, it's continually growing. I mean, it's that the place is exploding. Traffic is a nightmare.
It's the international city, and we accept everybody here.
Well, there you go. All right. That's not what you called to talk about. I had to hijack it. How are you?
I'm fine. I've called in before, but I'm doing a little rush thing here, the hypocrisy of the left. It dawned on me the other day. I'm a native from Georgia, born in the, white guy born in the South. And, we're being criticized over and over and saying we're at fault for having a century and a half ago slavery in this country because, hey, we're Southerners. But at the same time, they don't want us to, and I agree with the fact you shouldn't blame people because they look like their ancestors came from the Far East. They're saying they're being talked evil to or told to get out of the country because of the COVID-19. Well, we don't want to look at their past, their ancestors, and blame them for it, and I agree with that. But at the same time, don't look at me and blame me for slavery.
Yeah,
the slavery we may be having are these spas that you're talking about that are nothing but, house of the rising sun.
Listen. Putting it mildly. And, we're not supposed to have those conversations, and we're bad people who do. Cliff, listen, that's a great point. And, the whole idea in the Constitution, in the American Constitution, there's actually a provision that you cannot punish a family for the crimes or sins of the father. You can't punish the kids for what dad did. It's baked into the American constitutional framework. We are not culpable for the sins of our fathers. And yet, on the left, with religious fervor, they want us to be. There's actually, I got a story of the stack of stuff about reparations. It's very interesting. A place up in Illinois has decided to embrace reparations. They're going to give low interest loans and discounts to people who can prove they're descendants of slaves. And you know how they're going to do it? They're going to tax marijuana. The recreational marijuana sales will have a reparations tax. Do you know who is most likely in this area to buy marijuana? The people who will most benefit from the reparations tax. That's minorities in this area disproportionately are buying marijuana. They will tax marijuana. They will redistribute it back to the people who have bought the marijuana as low interest loans. It's a feel-good measure for them, and they're going to get away with it. But this whole idea of reparations, it goes back to we must be held accountable for the sins of our fathers. We can't just move forward. Time, we used to say, heals all wounds. Not anymore. Time itself is racist. You got to move forward. It just the whole thing seems to be nuts. All right. We got to move on when we come back. Kristi Noem, the governor, South Dakota? She was a darling for the right. A lot of Trump supporters were eyeing her for 2024, and she has sold out to the Chamber of Commerce. Here in Georgia, Republicans may yet again sell out to chambers of commerce. Chambers of woke commerce. It's becoming a problem. This past year, it was the Chamber of Commerce decided for the first time to align with Democrats. We're going to see more and more of this as the wokes take over the Fortune 500, and the Fortune 500 controls the Chamber of Commerce. We're going to see woke chambers of commerce. They want money and re-education, and it's going to end badly for all of them and us. We'll discuss it when we come back. The collapse of the Chamber of Commerce, hijacked by the wokes. So glad to have you with me here. It is 6 after the hour. Let's get going. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. Real quick, let me just comment. Thank you. I can't get. Well, let me record this so Philip can actually put this online for me. I can't respond to all of the people who have direct messaged me on Instagram and Twitter, emailed me, texted me. Way too many people have my cell phone number. That they were praying for me, rooting for me, supporting me. Thank you all. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me that so many people would be rooting for me. Yesterday began 6 consecutive back-to-back hours of radio. My goal, and I'm trying to be forthright with everyone, my goal is to get back to just 3 hours of radio. And I would like to ease my way into a national syndication. I would like to work collaboratively with folks to make that happen. And right now, I'm in a position where I've got to do 6 hours of radio. And I'm willing to do the work that I need to do. I think it makes me better in the long run. I'm here for the long haul. I know that there are people who get into radio because they want to be the conservative on the radio. Or there are people, we don't have Rush anymore. I'm going to be Rush because I'm a conservative and I'm going to do what he does. The number of people who get into radio because they want to be conservatives as opposed to the people who get into radio because they want to be in radio. And I was one of those people who got in and thought, I'll be a conservative. I'll try my hand at radio. And I want to be on radio. If I was told I couldn't talk about politics, I'd find something to talk about. I enjoy it. And doing 6 hours is going to be, it's harder than it looks. I don't use a script. I don't have people who do research for me. I do all of that myself because it is the Erick Erickson Show. It's not Erick Erickson and Friends show. I feel responsible for doing my show prep. I have people who help me. I have people who will send me stuff. Hey, did you see this? But by and large, I'm getting up in the morning and I'm doing all of this. I'm mindful that I have a face for radio. I am mindful that I have a voice for print. I cannot understand why people would want to listen to me as long as some people do, but they do. And I appreciate so much the support and well wishes and prayers from so many people as I begin this season in life where I'm got to do 6 hours of radio. And hopefully it won't be long. I have goals and time frames of when I would like to get back to 3 hours without losing everyone. I know there will be, if I'm able to do this and pull off what I want to do, I won't be able to take everyone given contract commitments and radio owners and syndicators and the things like that. But I would love to keep everyone as best I can and also not have to be talking for 6 hours. So thank you all. I'm sorry I can't get back to everyone. I have lost count of the number of people who have reached out. It's just hundreds of people, and I can't reply to everyone at this point. I'm overwhelmed, and thank you all. Now, I teased, I want to talk about the Chamber of Commerce. At the bottom of the hour, keep this in mind, remember Matthew Charles. Matthew Charles was the man who was let out of prison, and a judge made him go back to prison, said there was a technical problem with his release. He had to go back to prison in 2016, and in 2019, President Trump's First Step Act got him out of prison, made it possible for him to get out of prison. And he's struggled to get back on his feet and get housing. He's going to join me at the bottom of the hour to talk about his experience, and I want to. And something else, though, before I get to the Chamber of Commerce, because I got a caller I want to get to on this particular topic. But even before I get there, when I was on commercial break, my wife was talking to me, and my wife and I both take the view that we should be willing and able to understand the argument of the other side. Like, I find pro-lifers tend to be better able to articulate the view of the pro-abortion side than the pro-abortion side is of pro-lifers. The pro-abortion side tends to stereotype pro-lifers as Bible thumpers who want to control women's bodies. They can't acknowledge that there's validity to the argument that the child in utero is actually a human being. They don't really want to understand the argument. They just stereotype it. My wife tries, we try to be able to understand the other side's argument as best we can so that we can, particularly with our kids, provide our kids a rational explanation of why we disagree. And the only way to provide a rational explanation of why our worldview and our views and our ideas disagree with someone on the other side is to fairly understand and articulate the other side's point of view. And we both have a real hard time on the gun control argument. Because if I were in that grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, I would want my gun with me. I got a concealed carry Glock 43. And I would want that gun with me if I was in that grocery store. Even if I was hiding. No, I'm not saying, and this is one of the ideas that, again, the left tends to always stereotype the other side, and so they don't really understand us. The left would think, oh, well, I'm going to go guns blazing and try to stop the shooter. No, I would want to hold up somewhere and hide if I had my kids, them behind me. And if the shooter came with his gun, try to defend my family and surprise the shooter, if nothing else, and try to shoot the shooter before he can shoot me. Not go find the guy, not go hunting down. If I'm in my home and someone breaks into my house and I call 911, it could be 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes before they get there. I want to make sure I've got a gun to defend my family. And the left routinely tries to come up with arguments, well, you don't need the AR-15. You know, the majority of handgun violence in this country is through handguns. They dance around that argument, or they decide that, you know what, we should round up all the guns. We should do a mandatory gun buyback. We should repeal the Second Amendment, which you're not going to do. All these things. Well, you're going to take law-abiding citizens' guns away. You're not going to take criminals' guns away. And part of me wonders if in the back of their mind, and the thing not spoken is, well, yeah, but, you know, the bad guys, they're in gangs and they'll kill each other. Or there's some level of pejorative argument the left doesn't want to articulate. I have a hard time with this one. In large part because we do have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. The Supreme Court has said it's an individual right. Unlike abortion, it's actually a right you can find in the Constitution written there. And yet they continue to want to repeal gun laws. They want to curtail the right to own, to keep and bear arms. They want to do these things. And really, I think they keep Australia. Australia did a gun buyback. Yeah, but Australia doesn't have a Second Amendment. All these other countries don't have a Second Amendment. And you don't want to repeal the Second Amendment. You know you can't repeal the Second Amendment. I have a hard time relating to this. And I honestly think that one of the things we as a country need to do is think different. Instead of trying to confiscate people's guns and make it harder, we should make everyone in this country own a gun and know how to use it. Give everyone a gun. Federally allocated handgun. Every single American gets a gun. But in condition to gun ownership, you got to go learn gun safety and how to use it and when not to use it. Arm every American citizen so that when the shooter goes into the grocery store, they know that 10 out of 10 people in that grocery store are going to have a gun on them. Good luck, buddy. And now, when I say this, the left gets hysterical. People scream, you're just out of your mind. But listen, all of the solutions that the gun control people have are, we've got to confiscate guns, we've got to make it harder to own, pay no attention to the Second Amendment, let's curtail the right. And I'm thinking, no, we've got the right. We've got more guns than people circulating in this country. You're never going to stop the bad guy from getting someone's gun. They're never going to hand in their gun. So a well-armed citizenry is probably much safer than a completely unarmed citizenry. Let's have every single American own a gun. Make them learn how to use it safely, learn gun safety, and then let's see what happens. Well, you can't do that because, you know, the genie in the bottle. You know, the myth of Pandora's box, the guns are already here. They're already out of Pandora's box. You're never going to close Pandora's box again. So instead, let's get everybody a gun. That's my solution to gun control. is teach everyone how to control their gun and make sure they own one. Use government grant, get everybody a gun. Give it to them for free. Every single American. No felony. You know, once you do that, then of course the Democrats say, well, former felons, we should give them guns too. It's right, you know, that they get there eventually. Okay, give every American a gun. Teach them how to use it instead of doing all this gun control nonsense. That seems to me to be a better, more thoughtful solution than let's do all sorts of unconstitutional things, or let's take all the law-abiding citizens' guns away from them and let the criminals have them, or hey, let's take this gun that I don't like or understand. You know, it's got clips. It doesn't have magazines. It has clips, and that's what I'm going to say. And it's black. It needs to be pink, and then it won't look scary, and then you can have it. I mean, that was essentially the assault weapons ban. Is if you change the styling of an AR-15 and painted it pink, it was acceptable. But if it looked like an AR-15 and it was spooky black, well, then it was banned. It never made any sense to begin with. I think we need to think differently about guns. Now, let's go to the phones. Jacob, calling from Jasper. You're going to be next. Welcome to the program, Jacob.
Eric, thank you and congratulations on everything for you, sir.
Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment. I've watched everything that's happened in Cherokee and Atlanta with the spa shooting. And what has infuriated me, and I have to be up front, I am in law enforcement. I've been with law enforcement for 17 years. And the treatment of the CIO from the sheriff's department saying that it was a bad day. No one has ever walked onto a scene like they did. And I just think that sometimes you just got to give them some grace and ask them, is this what you mean? And when the mayor of Atlanta was trying to defend him, it's just you can't be wrong today. If anything is said, whether it was today, last week, last year, you're wrong. And until you can prove yourself right, you have to defend yourself, and it's just a complete 180 of what we do and how we do things. And it's sad because no one knows what they're going to do or say on any given day, but by the grace of God. And it makes me mad because no one's given grace. No one's given any kind of leeway anymore for anything.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, we now know that I think one of the people who got in hot water with the bad day comment was actually it was quoting what the shooter himself had said. The shooter had said it was a bad day, and there's a guy on the internet. What's the guy's Aaron Rupar? I believe he works for Fox. He what he does, his entire job, it seems, is to exert people to make them look bad if he's opposed to them or their agenda. And if you're a white male sheriff's deputy, you're on the bad list for him. And so he exerted this guy and turned it into a thing and left out the fact that the sheriff's deputy was actually quoting the shooter. And the trying to destroy a man who's willing to put his life on the line to keep everybody else safe is where we are with the left these days. And largely because if you're a white male sheriff's deputy in the intersectional list, you're the oppressor. So who the hell cares about you? This isn't sustainable for our society. And we need to do a better job, frankly, of showing some grace to officers in the line of fire and officers who are responding to these situations. And, the big issue here, more than any other, is the lack of grace currently in society. And this is on all sides, by the way. Cancel culture exists on the right as well. Cancel culture exists on all sides. And we've got to do a better job of showing grace to people in difficult circumstances who may misspeak. And internet culture, particularly Twitter culture, makes it harder to do. And what we see with the media now, one of the worst trends in the media is to take 5 anonymous trolls on Twitter who are complaining about a sheriff's deputy and turn it into a national story, as opposed to, hey, the guy's on the job. He's not working off a script. He's trying to recount what the shooter himself said. And then they turn it into a story to attack the sheriff's deputy. We gotta defend people who work in law enforcement as best we can. There's been a real effort to trash them all in the name of social justice. There are bad police officers. We should call them out individually, but individually people should be culpable for their own problems. We shouldn't paint with a broad brush, and too many people want to do that these days.
You can follow Erick around social media.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Listen, some of y'all know Rocco's. Rocco's is up in North Georgia, in Jasper, Georgia. And Rocco's on May 1st and 2nd from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. is having their first annual Rockin' Affair. Free admission to the public. They want to create a fun way for everybody to get out, welcome the warm weather, get back to normal. We're definitely heading in the right direction. And right now, they're looking for vendors. You can sign up at roccosjasper.com and go to their Facebook page. Right now, they've got Reformation Brewery is going to sponsor. Coca-Cola of Jasper is going to sponsor. Jasper Jeep is going to sponsor. They need sponsors, and they're looking statewide in Georgia. If you want to go up, promote your event, roccosjasper.com. Rocco's is not what you would expect. They're going to have a wide variety of music. They're going to have a great menu. The food is great, by the way. They're 20 minutes north of Woodstock. They're on Highway 515, 515, I guess I should say. They're also partnering with Pickens Pets, a charity. They're going to have music acts. They're going to have Doug Stone, the Georgia Satellites, the Drifters, blues artist Eric Gales. Tickets are on sale now. You got to go to roccosjasper.com. Now listen, if you've never been up there, Rocco's is the destination. It's not just go eat. It is a destination. It's a fun afternoon. It's a great night out. It's fun for all ages. Live music, Wednesday, 7 to 9, Friday and Saturday, 8 to 11, Saturday and Sunday afternoons, 2 to 5. Go to roccosjasper.com. Find out more. If you want to be a vendor, though, it's going to be a huge event. Great way to promote your wares, your goods, your store, your product. Partner with Rocco's. Go to roccosjasper.com. And again, it's going to be their Rockin' Affair, May 1st and 2nd, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Get up to Jasper. It's a beautiful place up there anyway. And the weather's going to be good. It's a great way to welcome spring and welcome good weather at roccosjasper.com. Now, when we come back, and it's biker friendly. A buddy of mine just texted me. Rocco's is biker friendly. My wife would love that. If you got a bike, got a Harley, you can go to Rocco's. It's not a biker gang hangout. It's just biker friendly. So roccosjasper.com. Head there. You and your friends on your Harleys, but don't tell my wife. Okay. Now, when we come back, this is special to me. I have followed the story of Matthew Charles. If you will recall, Matthew Charles in 2013 applied for a sentence modification to his sentence for drug crimes, for crack possession, had a firearm. He was considered a repeat offender, went to prison. He was released in 2016. And then a year and a half after being out on the streets, court reversed the reduction in sentence and claimed errors. He had to go back to prison. And because of the First Step Act that President Trump signed into law in 2019, January 3rd of 2019, Matthew Charles left prison again. He has struggled since then. In 2019, 2020, there was a story, actually, March 8th of 2019, he had trouble finding a place to live. People were stepping in to help him. While he was in prison, instead of being bitter, he started a Bible study. The man committed a crime, and he paid for it. And trouble has plagued him as he continues to get back on his feet. This is government, civil justice, and criminal justice reform that has helped him tremendously. And I want to talk to him, and he's going to join me when we get back from this commercial break. He's going to join me. Look, they reached out and said, "Would you like to interview him?" I was like, yes. This man was on my prayer list. I prayed for this guy. We have never met, and we get to talk when we come back. Most of you know this case, and I'm delighted to be able to talk to this guy. Please join me after the next commercial break. Matthew Charles is going to join me to talk about rebuilding his life thanks to what President Trump did. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. It is 35 past the hour. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I'm kind of overwhelmed by the opportunity to talk to my guest, Matthew Charles. We have never met, and boy, did I have him on my prayer list for a long time. And Mr. Charles, thank you so much for being willing to spend some time with me on the radio.
All right, thank you for having me, Eric. Thanks, sir.
I remember in 2018 when you had to go back into prison, having been released in 2016 due to technical errors, I guess, in the sentencing. And I put you on my prayer list and was just committed to praying for you. And you handled everything with so much grace. And then with the First Step Act, we're able to get back out of prison. And I want to let you just talk about your experience.
Okay. I was arrested in 1995 and sentenced to a 35-year sentence in 1996 for federal drug and gun violations. And before I was actually able to go over into prison while in detention, I ended up becoming a Christian. And once I became a Christian, it just completely changed my whole mindset and my heart and everything. So once I went into federal prison, I just continued to do what I knew what was right and learn more about my faith. And 21 years later, I was actually able to be released in 2016, once the crack to powder cocaine ratio changed to 18-1. But the prosecutors appealed my sentence because it wasn't made fully retroactive, and I was ordered to return back to prison. As you stated, I had to self-surrender in May of 2018 to return to prison to serve the remaining 10 years. But when I went back 7.5 months later, the First Step Act was signed into law by President Donald Trump, and on January 3rd, 2019, I was the first person released based on the First Step Act.
I found it so absurd in 2018 that they were sending you back, particularly just given your story and what you had done in prison. And I mean, on the outside looking in, when that story broke and I started paying attention to it, you seemed to be handling it with way more grace than I probably would have. And what were you thinking? I mean, you've embraced Christianity, and here God has let you out of prison, and now suddenly you got to go back in. I mean, what was your thinking then?
I would say that I had a roller coaster of emotions. My thinking was I didn't fully understand it. I was kind of disheartened, but at the same token, I knew that the right thing for me to do was return back to prison to serve the remaining 10 years because a lawful order had been given by the judge. But like I stated, I still was kind of hurt by it, and I was like, well, I done 21.5 years on a nonviolent drug offense, and I did so without one single disciplinary report or infraction, whether it was minor or major. I didn't have any, and I had gotten out, and I had a church home, I had a job, and I was volunteering, so I was doing everything that you would want a productive member of society who has been incarcerated, coming from incarceration to do.
Now, I'm reminded of the story in Genesis of Joseph and his brothers, and sends him off to Egypt in that way. And there's that great line in the Old Testament of what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And I think about that and how so many Republicans in Congress at the time, controlling Congress, seized upon your story as one of the ways to push the First Step Act to get through. And I'm wondering, have you ever thought about that? This what I perceive as an injustice that happened to you, had it not happened, the First Step Act might not have actually been passed.
I agree, because oftentimes it takes personal stories. It takes them being able to see a face or hear about a grave situation of injustice in order to move. And the fact that I was incarcerated for 21.5 years without any infractions inside the prison, I was an educational tutor, helped many people to obtain their GED equivalency. I worked as a law librarian. So I was just doing everything. So they was now able to put a face on the fact that I had been out for nearly 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, and sent back only because incarceration was about punitiveness instead of rehabilitation. So yes, it helped be able to share that with the legislators, and they were able to see that this does affect people personally, and they had an example of it in me.
Now, how has your life been since you got back out of prison? I remember reading an article, I think, in 2019 after you got out, that you were trying to find a place to stay and get back on your feet. And just what's life been like since then?
It's getting better. In January of 2019, once I was released, because I had to go back and self-surrender and return to prison, therefore everything that I had obtained during those 2 years, I had lost. So once I was able to be released January 3rd, 2019, it was like the second week I ended up getting a call from the White House administration inviting me to the State of the Union. And my attorneys was trying to contact me, telling me that I need to call this number, get in touch with the White House to find out what it was. And once I got that invitation, I came to Washington, D.C. At the time, the State of the Union didn't take place because there was a government shutdown. But I was able to go over to the Congress and meet the senators and legislators and talk to them about criminal justice reform and thank them for the First Step Act. Then shortly thereafter, I was invited back because the State of the Union did take place, and I was able to go over and meet the president and his wife Melania and attend the State of the Union. And at that time, the nation was able to see that I received a standing ovation from the entire Congress. But after that, I ran into housing problems. I ran into some employment problems, and those are all, unnecessary pitfalls that come from a person trying to re-enter society. So therefore, I had problems with housing, and Kim Kardashian West, she stepped up to help me with that. And the thing about it is that hurdle shouldn't be there because 95 to 97% of those that are incarcerated, as long as they don't have the death penalty or life sentence, are going to be returning to society.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that obviously supportive of the First Step Act and criminal justice and prison reform. If you could be king for a day, I guess, so to speak, what would you think you would want to do to improve the situation of people who have been in your situation?
I would say that I would probably do away with like zero tolerance when it comes to housing. There shouldn't be any barriers to a person being able to rent an apartment or a house, as long as their incarceration didn't have anything to do with anything to do with the housing. But other than that, I say there has to be better opportunities for people coming out so that they can get out and land on their feet. Because without proper employment and housing, they're doomed to repeat the same cycles that they did in the past or even recidivize and go back to prison. So I would just try to make sure that their organizations are just ways that the parole or probation officers will be able to assist people with housing as well as employment once they're released from prison.
Mr. Charles, I want to deviate a little bit from just the First Step Act and what happened to you, because I know you mentioned early on, and I know this is part of your story, your faith. We're coming into the Easter season next week with Palm Sunday and Holy Week. And just would you talk to my audience a bit about how your faith has helped you?
My faith has helped me tremendously. If you were to look at my past, you would see that it was definitely a past without God. I didn't believe in God because I was born in the 60s and my father was an alcoholic. He was very verbally and physically abusive to my mother and my siblings. And because, I just felt at the time God never showed up in my household and spared my mother or me or my siblings from a brutal beating at the hands of my father, I just didn't believe in God. But in 1995, after I got arrested on the federal offense, and while in the county jail, God just started to deal with my heart. And as he started to deal with my heart, he started to reveal himself to me in ways that I didn't even think was possible. And shortly thereafter, in February 1996, I accepted the Lord as my personal Savior. And from that standpoint, everything just started to change. I started to have more faith, more joy, more hope, and a greater expectancy. And so I just continued to live out that life. And as we, like you say, coming up on the Easter season, we know that Moses cried out to God and as well as the Pharaoh, asking him to release his people, let my people go. And I'm a firm believer that God created mankind, so therefore we are all his people. So I think that God cares about each and every one of us, and that we should trust, respect, and help, anybody that we possibly can. So I've been given the opportunity with the organization FAM to continue to work in criminal justice reform and help those that have been left behind. And the funny thing about that, Eric, is the fact that I'll often look at the verse where, God tells us to help the least of these, and I use that statement as God called me, who was the least of them, to help the rest of the least of them.
That just it does my heart good to hear that. I genuinely started praying for you when I heard about your story, and I can't tell you how delighted I am to be able to talk to you. And I wish you so much in life, and I know your heart is grounded in the Lord, and it's remarkable for me to be able to hear you tell this story, but also to be grounded in faith that you didn't lose hope, even though there may have been despair when you had to go back into prison in 2018, and just your doing that really helped move this piece of legislation forward that's helping so many people now. It's just I'm incredibly delighted to talk to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, listen, I want to wish you a happy Easter, and just please keep up the work you're doing. God truly has a purpose for all of us, as you know, and he certainly got one for you. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thank you as well, Eric, for having me on your show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Matthew Charles, y'all, this story was incredible. This man was released in 2016, and the prosecutors actually went to court in 2018 and essentially made the case in court, Judge, we don't want him to go back to prison, but there was an error in the sentencing, and the only way to get it fixed is for him to go back to prison, and we don't have any discretion. And the judge and the prosecutor all said, we do not have any discretion. This has to be done. And Matthew Charles went willingly back to prison. And had he not, that First Step Act probably would not have been passed. And I have come back so often to that verse in Genesis, that what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And this man, by going back to prison, has been able to help himself and so many others. And I'm kind of overwhelmed talking to him. I remember that case so distinctly, and fretting over him and talking about it on the radio, and being able to talk to him about this First Step Act. And it is just the first step. There's more that we can do to get people on their feet. I do believe that punishment in prison should be punitive, but I also believe that once you have been punished for your crime, we should get you back on your feet. And there frankly are, I think we need to acknowledge, a series of impediments for a lot of people once they get out of prison to get back on their feet. And oftentimes recidivism happens and they go back. There are ways forward. I think, frankly, conservatives can lead on this by helping people essentially get out of prison, get back on their feet, and show that in America, even you can make something of your life. In America, Matthew Charles is making something of his life, help with rehabilitating others who have come after him. And it's a fantastic story and a fantastic policy that was signed not by Barack Obama, but by Donald Trump.
You're listening to The Erick Erickson Show.
Hello there. I gotta get the recipe going for this week. I haven't picked one out in any event. Y'all, I really am a little overwhelmed talking to Matthew Charles. I realize he didn't know me from Adam, but boy, I was emotionally invested in his story. What an incredible person. So let me just read you this headline. This is from the Washington Post. Headline: Trump predicted news ratings would tank if I'm not here. He wasn't wrong. Of all Donald Trump's prophecies and predictions that Mexico would pay for a border wall, that the coronavirus would spontaneously disappear, that he would easily be reelected, one wasn't entirely wrong. Quote, newspapers, televisions, all forms of media will tank if I'm not here because without me, their ratings are going down the tubes, he said in 2017. Barely 2 months into the post-Trump era, news outlets are indeed losing much of the audience and readership they gained during his presidency. In other words, journalism's Trump bump may be giving way to a slump. After a record-setting January, traffic to the nation's most popular mainstream news sites, including the Washington Post, plummeted in February, according to the audience tracking firm ComScore. The top sites were also generally doing worse than in February of last year when the pandemic became a major international news story. The Post, for example, saw the number of unique visits fall 26% from January to February and 7% from a year ago. The story is largely the same for cable and broadcast news. Audiences grew during the pandemic last spring and summer, remaining high in the fall as Trump tried to fight his electoral defeat with false claims of vote fraud, and swelled in the first weeks of 2021 when a mob attacked the Capitol and Trump became the first president in history to be impeached and acquitted twice. Now that Joe Biden's in the White House and Trump has essentially disappeared from the news cycle, many of those viewers have drifted away. The most deeply affected network, CNN. After surpassing Fox and MSNBC, the network has lost 45% of its primetime audience. 45%! MSNBC's audience dropped 26%. Fox News has essentially regained its leading position by standing still. Its ratings have fallen just 6% since the first week of the year. Remember back in 2016, Jeff Zucker essentially made Trump. I remember they covered Trump. If Trump's plane landed, they covered it as if it was Air Force One. Wall-to-wall coverage of Donald Trump's plane, his 757, going down the runway wherever he went, pulling into a hangar, whatever, didn't matter. They covered it. And at the end of the year, Zucker essentially apologized for giving so much coverage to Trump, acknowledging that CNN's coverage essentially helped him get elected, but then said, but it was great for business. CBS News as well acknowledged it was great for business. And all those media networks, after he lost in November, celebrated the fall of Fox News, celebrated the collapse of Fox News, and Fox is back on top now. In fact, you will notice that you don't actually have a bunch of coverage in any of these reports about OAN or Newsmax. It's all Fox and CNN and MSNBC. And Fox is back on top. The news media needed Donald Trump. There was, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, there was a symbiotic relationship between much of the media and Donald Trump. They depended on each other. And now, of course, Donald Trump is going to build a social outlet, some social media site that he's going to come back and control the message. Jason Miller, one of his spokesmen, was on television saying he's going to build a new platform. It's going to be Trump dominant. I'm sure members of the media will try to conspire to shame whichever host web company does it. They'll try to get Amazon Web Services, if they use Amazon, to shut it down. They'll do something to bully and badger it. They want to move on, but think, just think for a moment. Poor Jim Acosta. Poor Jim Acosta, he's headed into an anchor chair at CNN, largely because he learned how to make himself the story when Donald Trump was president, going down to the border, standing in front of the wall, saying, we don't really need this wall, even as the illegal aliens were walking across the border behind him. Standing in the White House, yelling at the White House press secretary, making himself part of the story. And now there's no Donald Trump. People aren't really talking about Jim Acosta anymore. Don Lemon on CNN. The only way people talk about Don Lemon anymore is he says stupid crap on TV and everybody laughs at him. That's it. Don Lemon has become the clown show of CNN, where he says outlandish things to try to get attention. Otherwise, no one pays attention to him now that Donald Trump is gone. He's got to beclown himself to get attention. Even Jim Acosta is not willing to beclown himself to get attention, and CNN's ratings are going down as a result. The news media needed Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the best thing for the media's business. Subscriptions are down, eyeballs are down, revenue is down. How long before the layoffs come? Well, if they come, at least the journalists, maybe they'll finally learn how to code, like all the out-of-work coal miners and pipeline workers they wanted to learn to code. I can say that on my program because I won't get canceled. But if I were to point out that the next round of media layoffs come that they could learn to code, they would have no sense of humor about it. They want all these other people to learn to code. They themselves, no, they think that they are entitled to their jobs. They think the First Amendment only applies to them. Well, guess what? Turns out their employment was dependent on Donald Trump staying in the White House, and they rooted against him. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Thank you for joining me. Y'all, the former president, Donald Trump. I know it pains some people to give President Trump credit. You know, I'm in this weird position where I genuinely believe I should tell you what I think. I sometimes defy the crowd and go against the herd. If I say something critical of President Trump, I'm immediately attacked as being never Trump. Never mind, I endorsed him in 2020. If I say something nice about Donald Trump, oh, well, you're just a sellout trying to grow your radio audience. There's no sense of, maybe he's just telling us what he actually thinks. Well, I myself am just telling you what I actually think. President Trump actually did a very good job with Operation Warp Speed. And our nation is on course to more quickly recover from the virus than the European Union. This is Guy Benson writing at Town Hall. In a deep dive article published over the weekend, the New York Times chronicles some important lessons from the ongoing coronavirus vaccine distribution saga. Byron York summarizes the findings with 3 takeaways. First, Trump's leadership on vaccine was vastly better than anyone in Europe. Second, when it comes to the vaccine, Britain was smart to leave the European Union. Third, elite opinion was dreadfully wrong on both counts. The piece begins with a vignette of President Trump fielding calls from European leaders desperate for advice about how they might belatedly replicate some of America's success, and they still haven't caught up. This is from the New York Times. Since last year, the rollout gap between Europe and the United States has only widened, and some of the countries hardest hit early in the pandemic are facing a deadly third wave of infections. France, large parts of Italy, and other regions are back in lockdown. Roughly 20,000 Europeans die of COVID-19 each week. The continent was dealt a further setback when a scare over blood clots and brain bleeds led several countries this week to temporarily halt the distribution of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Most of them resumed using it on Friday after Europe's top drug regulator vouched for its safety, but public confidence in the shot has been badly shaken. There's no single culprit, rather a cascade of small decisions have led to increasingly long delays. The bloc was comparatively slow to negotiate contracts with drug makers. Its regulators were cautious and deliberative in approving some vaccines. Europe also bet on vaccines that did not pan out or significantly had supply disruptions, and national governments snarled local efforts in red tape. The AstraZeneca vaccine rollout there was botched. The media in Europe sensationalized it, and now people don't want to take it. COVID-19 vaccines were shown to be safe and 79% effective in preventing symptomatic diseases in widely anticipated U.S. clinical trials, providing a vote of confidence for the shot and a pathway to its authorization. The interim trial data showed the vaccine, developed in partnership with the University of Oxford, was 80% effective in participants aged 65 and older, a group previous AstraZeneca trials lacked in large numbers. The shot was found to be 100% effective in preventing serious illness and hospitalization. European governments are often seen in the United States as free-spending liberal bastions. But it was the Trump administration that threw billions at drug makers and cosseted their business. Brussels, by comparison, took a conservative, budget-conscious approach that left the open market largely untouched, and it has paid for it. The answer today is the same as it was in December. The bloc shopped for vaccines like a customer. The United States basically went into business with drug makers, spending much more heavily to accelerate vaccine development, testing, and production. Europe did not. By the way, it's worth noting it was the American private sector pharmaceutical companies that did it. What was the government doing? What did the government do? The government of the United States just got out of the way. The government of the United States, Operation Warp Speed, spent money for testing and then got rid of red tape so that the private sector pharmaceutical companies could work. And this is one of the big issues here that you got to pay attention to that even the New York Times doesn't really get to. One of the biggest differences between the United States and Europe is that Europe has given us the government progressives want, a government run by a technocratic elite who believe that if you can get the politicians out of the way and let the technocratic bureaucrats decide life, that everything will be hunky-dory. And it turns out that technocrats tend to be risk averse. It's the politicians who are accountable to the voters who tend to be willing to take risks. And in the United States, Donald Trump took big risks, and frankly, he almost won re-election. 43,000 votes in the Electoral College could have gotten him reelected. Had he had a little more message discipline, he probably would have gotten elected. The European technocrats are the ones who had problems. And by the way, Boris Johnson in Britain also took risks. Why? Because he's an elected politician accountable to the voters. This is from the New York Times. Europeans are stung especially to see Britain's rollout going so well after the country exited the bloc. Everyone wants to know why the European Union has not triumphed. In a crisis, it always becomes clear that the European Union is not a country, said Jacob Kierkegaard of the German Marshall Fund. He said the bloc approached vaccine procurement like a contract negotiation when in fact it was a zero-sum game with limited supply. A doctor commented to the New York Times, said Washington and London approached the crisis in lockstep. The president had bi-weekly meetings, the president's advisors had bi-weekly meetings with their British counterparts, but Europe went its own way. In the United States, there's much more flexible, a liberal system. You just vaccinate people who come along. Same in the UK. It goes quicker. In Europe, it gets quite regulated. Why? Because in Europe, the technocrats thrive on regulation. The technocratic governments of Europe, the liberal pipe dream of how government in the United States should be, have failed to deliver in this crisis. The vision of the European technocracy is what American progressives want. And it has failed there. It's the Trump administration and the Johnson administration that actually succeeded. Now, there's a moral to the story here. In Europe, the European technocrats have failed to deliver on COVID relief through heavy vaccinations and approvals and supplies. Britain and the United States have thrived. They have succeeded. Britain, the United States, and Israel lead the world in vaccine rates right now. Operation Warp Speed from President Trump, ridiculed by the media at the time. Remember last year at this time, they were saying there's no way we'll have a vaccine before the summer of 2021. We're outpacing the rest of the world in vaccinations with, Great Britain, Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE. We're in the top 5 with them. Because we have politicians accountable to voters who took risks. And Europe had technocrats who are risk averse. But there's something else here too. The experts were wrong. The experts said if Great Britain left the European Union, it would be disaster. And when COVID hit, it was just another amplifying excuse of you really can't leave. You're all going to die if you leave. How many British citizens are alive thanks to Britain leaving the European Union? Now, the left doesn't like it. The left says, oh, that's just a hot take. That's a Twitter hot take. No. How many British citizens will live because Great Britain did not do what Europe did? How many British citizens are alive because of Boris Johnson? Because France and Italy and other countries, they're going back down on lockdown now. Great Britain is starting to open back up because so many people are getting vaccinated. And then in this country, how many woke progressives are alive because Donald Trump was president and authorized Operation Warp Speed? You're not supposed to ask that. How dare you? But it's a legitimate question. And the legitimate answer is probably a lot of people. Because the very same media that heralds now the approach of the vaccine and the distribution and tries to avoid noting that it was the American private sector pharmaceutical companies that have done this, they ridiculed Donald Trump at the time and during the campaign said, well, we're never going to get a vaccine. This operation, they're not really doing anything. Operation Warp Speed, it's all smoke and mirrors. They're not really doing it. Actually, no. The Trump administration's policies worked. The Trump administration's way, they have no plan. They're doing nothing. No, actually, they were doing a lot behind the scenes, and they got the vaccine rolled out. I played that clip a while back of Jake Tapper even noting, you got to give the Trump administration credit for this. Even as they did some things they should have done, did some things wrong, and didn't do other things they should have, this they did remarkably well. And every American progressive who's getting stuck in the arm with a needle with the vaccine in it has Donald Trump to thank for it. And they'll never do it. They'll complain. You got the Biden administration saying, oh, we've surpassed our goal. We're going to hit our goal of 100 million vaccines well before the 100th day. Well, of course you are, thanks to Donald Trump, whose administration was overseeing the United States doing more than 1 million vaccines a day before Joe Biden even ever took office. The media itself goes to great pains to avoid having to talk about that. But the fact of the matter is the New York Times is left to have to report that even in Europe, they were asking Donald Trump for advice on how to get things moving over there. The answer is you have politicians who are held accountable to voters, and you don't rely on a technocracy of bureaucracy compounded by government red tape and administration. Politicians will take risks that bureaucrats will not. And in the American system, we're a bunch of risk takers. It is one of the secrets to our success. And the British, from whom we are derived, will take risks. Boris Johnson has taken risks. And all of the experts and all of their claims were wrong. Expertise is needed. And so much of it got broken in the last few years because of Trump derangement syndrome. We need experts. We do. We need experts. What we're finding is experts who constrain themselves to their field of expertise tend to get it right. But so many experts broken by Trump stretch their legs. Oh, well, I may be an expert on this, but because I'm a doctor, I can be an expert on all these other things as well. They didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. They were just broken by Donald Trump and figured it gave them extra expertise for CNN to put on TV to bash the president. Well, it turns out a lot of them were wrong. Donald Trump was right. And a lot of people are alive today thanks to Donald Trump and Boris Johnson instead of the European Union technocrats and the progressive wokes who said we'd never even get the vaccine.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show, the perfect blend.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Bill, calling from Woodstock. You're going to be next. Welcome.
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I am doing well, thank you. So you teased us about the governor of South Dakota.
Yep.
And in this woke culture, I'm wondering, is it okay to say she's hot?
A lot of people would agree with you.
I saw her on Fox last night, and she stood up to Tucker Carlson on not moving forward with signing the legislation. And I sort of understand where she's coming from. She wants to start some big coalition to defend Title IX, which in effect will save women's sports in South Dakota. She is afraid of losing a lawsuit, though. So I'd like you to weigh in on that, but also I wanted to say good luck with your new show. 6 hours a day might be too much, but I'll definitely keep on the morning 3 hours.
Well, look, I appreciate it. So here's the thing for those who don't know. Now, you got to know this. Kristi Noem, when she was in Congress, was an establishment Republican who never once defied her leadership for the House Freedom Caucus or even the Republican Study Committee. She never stood up to the Republican establishment. And then she got elected governor, and she has very frequently used conservative, free market, Trumpian rhetoric, but her policies have never exactly been that way. And along comes legislation in North Dakota that bars boys from girls' sports at the secondary and collegiate level. She actively opposes both. The legislature passes the secondary education one. She winds up, I think, signing it into law, even though she had tried to kill it in the legislature, and then vetoes the one about colleges, saying, well, the NCAA would punish her. What Trump's voters want is they want to see someone who will fight, and she surrendered. And now we know, it turns out one of her chief advisors is a lobbyist who's trying to get the NCAA to bring sports to South Dakota. Her chief of staff is involved in the Chamber of Commerce there, which actively lobbied against it. And so she caves on this issue. Now, arguably, legally, she's kept South Dakota from a lawsuit. But, the NCAA and the Fortune 500 are increasingly bullying American cities and states to do woke progressive things, and conservatives are looking for a fighter, and she chose not to fight. She says she's going to build a coalition, which to me sounds very much like Joe Biden wants to form a commission on reparations. He doesn't actually want to solve the issue. He just wants to punt it to a committee. That's essentially what she wants to do with this.
Yeah, well, I told you before, I work for Fortune 500, and we are getting this woke stuff shoved every which way. If we have enough patience against the woke, and there's enough voices like yours, in time, will this woke stuff pass?
Yeah.
I mean, will there be some hope that
I do
truth
have
will
hope.
stand up?
I've got hope for it because it ultimately makes no sense. And I think what you ultimately are going to wind up seeing is that the wokes turn on each other. It's very much like, one of the things that I think Peter Jackson caught accurately in his Lord of the Rings trilogy that J.R.R. Tolkien writes about in the books is that the orcs and the trolls and the goblins, they're as nasty to each other as they are to everyone else. And they only stop fighting and killing each other when they've got good people to go attack. And eventually what's going to happen is the wokes are going to turn on each other, and there's going to be a lot of nasty infighting there as the rest of us rally against them. One of the things that has us at a disadvantage right now really is the Fortune 500. The Fortune 500 is totally bought into the wokes. In fact, and Bill, I'm going to let you go there. Thank you for the phone call. In fact, one of the issues we've got, I mean, even where I am in Georgia, but nationally, this is happening in Texas and elsewhere, is when states try to pass pro-life laws. What you see is the Fortune 500 company come in and say, well, we're not going to do business in your state if you don't let us kill kids. In a lot of states, it's religious liberty. You want to pass RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that Bill Clinton, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi drafted. They're now all against it. They were fine with it when it wasn't Christians who benefited. Now that it's Christians who benefited, they want to repeal the law. In Georgia, it's the Chamber of Commerce that has helped kill this, and Hollywood film industry in Georgia. In Texas as well, the Hollywood film industry and Apple, Google, Amazon, the tech companies have come in and tried to kill scores of pro-life legislation and conservative legislation and religious liberty legislation. And you've got to have Republicans stand up to them. In fact, I want to talk about this very issue when we come back. Republicans have to fight. The Chamber of Commerce in Georgia, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, has come out opposed to election reform in Georgia. The wokes are targeting Republican members of the legislature, trying to get them fired from their jobs for wanting common sense electoral reform in Georgia. The only real way to fight back is to pass these laws. Republicans cannot cave on this stuff. They've got to fight back, or it's going to embolden the woke mob to come for them even further. It's becoming a real issue. It's flying under the radar, and we need to put a spotlight on it. And I want to talk about what's happening, because many of you may not be aware of what's happened to John Albers in the state Senate in Georgia, who had a very reasonable compromise. And it's not just Georgia. I live in Georgia. I am attuned to Georgia. But this is happening in Texas. It's happening in Iowa. It's happening in Florida. The wokes and the Fortune 500 are trying to push a very leftist agenda. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I need to pull back the curtain for just a moment. None of you who are listening who work for me or work with me complain about this. This is my judgment call on the Erick Erickson Show. That would be me. I'm going to say this. My goal is to expand the footprint of this program beyond the state of Georgia. And I live in Georgia, and one of the selling points originally for this program has been you got a guy in Georgia who lives in the middle of Georgia who can talk about Georgia on the radio. And that's all well and good, except now, dynamics are changing in radio. I frankly think I'm a very good radio show host and would like to grow this program. We have been reaching out and we're talking to people, and one of the things that comes up is, well, it sounds very Georgia-centric. Well, yes, it does, because all of our affiliates right now are in Georgia, so I can do that, and frankly, I live in Georgia. I do believe I can relate things nationally to things that are happening in Georgia. I say all of that because I need to focus on a Georgia issue with all of you, and if you're not in Georgia, you need to understand this is actually a national issue and not a Georgia issue. John Albers is a state senator in Georgia. John Albers has a reasonable compromise. John Albers is a lawyer for a prominent national law firm that represents companies in labor disputes. He's also a ranking Republican in the state Senate in Georgia. And John Albers sees all of the kerfuffle about election reform, and he has a reasonable compromise to ensure the integrity of absentee votes. One of the biggest national complaints by Republicans about the election was the handling of absentee ballots nationwide. One of the conspiracy theories, it's unproven, but a lot of people believe it, is that people were copying absentee ballots and then running the copied absentee ballots through scanners to add votes for Joe Biden. No one has been able to prove this. No review of the absentee ballots has shown photocopies, but people believe it. John Albers, state senator in Georgia, thoughtful individual, lawyer, wants to reassure people this isn't happening. And one of his ideas is a very simple idea. Watermark the absentee ballots. That's his proposal for absentee election integrity reform. Watermark the absentee ballots so that they cannot be photocopied. That if they were photocopied, the watermark would be highlighted in such a way that the scanners couldn't scan them. It's a reasonable proposal. It has been coupled with the idea that to get your absentee ballot, you've got to write down your driver's license number and birthday, because that's the information on your driver's license that matters if you show up and vote. So put it on the envelope for your absentee ballot on the inside envelope so that your privacy is protected by putting it on the inside envelope. Your anonymity is protected by not putting it on the ballot, but you comply with the voter ID law. John Albers' proposal is a reasonable proposal. Watermark the ballots and tie the absentee vote to your photo ID requirements for voting. Though John Albers' proposal is way more reasonable, objectively way more reasonable and less onerous than many of the other Republican proposals in the legislature, John Albers has been targeted by the Lincoln Project and by left-wing woke groups for destruction, because so many Fortune 500 companies already hijacked by the wokes use John Albers' law firm to defend against labor issues. They're pressuring the law firm to fire John Albers. They want him driven from his job and livelihood, and his only sin is a very reasonable idea: watermark the ballots. and make people present proof that they have photo ID. Because you got to vote in Georgia, you got to have photo ID. His proposal does not include restriction of days, does not include bans on drop boxes, does not include curtailing who can vote by absentee ballot, doesn't include any of those things. And yet he's being vilified by the wokes, by the Lincoln Project guys who protected John Weaver, who we now know was sexually harassing young men, some of whom were teenagers, and they knew about it and they tried to cover it up. And a lot of them are trying to cash in on the fame and fortune of the Lincoln Project, and they're attacking a very good man with a very reasonable proposal. And it's not just him, and it's not just Georgia. His I know best because I live in Georgia, but this is happening nationwide. And what we're seeing is chambers of commerce. Chambers of commerce are actively working with left-wing groups to stop any sort of voter integrity projects. They're blocking any efforts to reform voting. I'm not going to argue with you if you're on the left right now. We can do that later. I'm not going to argue with you on the issue of curtailing early voting days. I think we should. Some of you think we shouldn't. I'm not going to argue with you right now on getting rid of weekend voting. I think we should. Some of you don't. I'm not even going to argue about restricting absentee balloting. I think we should. Most of you don't, and it's not going to happen anyway. All I'm talking about are some very specific ideas with bipartisan support. Watermark absentee ballots and put your driver's license number and birthday on them. That's it. Supported by most people. Supported by majority of black citizens, white citizens, independents, even Democrats and Republicans support these ideas. And John Albers, they're trying to destroy his life and livelihood for that moderation. The Chamber of Commerce is in on this. They want nothing but what the wokes want. And the woke position is that we should make it as easy as possible for everyone to vote, and frankly, we shouldn't, because people are stupid, and we should make it a little more difficult so that stupid people are weeded out of the process. But more importantly, there are a lot of Americans who don't trust the system. And you can say it's because of lies, that's fine. But there are a lot of people who don't trust the system, and it's not that they want to stop Democrats from voting, it's that they want to believe that the system works, and the way to believe the system works is to ensure the integrity of the ballot, to ensure the integrity of the process, to ensure the integrity of absentee ballots. And the way you do those is you watermark the ballots so that you can't photocopy them, and you make people put their driver's license number down, because if they showed up to vote, they would have to do it. So let's apply it to the entire voting process to make sure you are who you say you are, and only you get to vote. You can't tell me there's not election fraud. Look, I'm in the camp that says the election was not stolen, and even I must admit there is always election fraud. Never enough to throw out a mass election like the presidency, but certainly enough to overturn city council races. Hell, we had one in Georgia this past election that has to have a do-over because of irregularities, like 15 irregularities. Ensure the integrity of the process. And instead what's happening is the woke mob is coming for people proposing reasonable changes. The Lincoln Project wants to destroy John Albers, because essentially now they're a left-wing Democratic front group. They couldn't make money anymore in the Republican Party, so they've had to run to the Democratic Party to keep cashing in. They got beach houses to pay for. And the wokes will abide nothing other than absolutely throwing out the integrity of the process to ensure that they can win and only they can win. This is about the exercise of raw power. And reasonable people like John Albers are caught in the middle. And who is the Chamber of Commerce siding with? The very people who would be perfectly happy to destroy the Fortune 500. Ironically, the Fortune 500 is better off siding with the socialists than the conservatives, because conservatives believe in free markets, and part of the belief in a free market is the creative destruction of the marketplace, where the David can slay Goliath. And the Fortune 500 is very opposed to the idea that David might be able to slay Goliath. the Fortune 500 is much better off with the socialists who can help them and protect them and prevent anyone else from getting rich, preserving the status quo. Elizabeth Warren, hell, she's perfectly fine with the millionaires and billionaires out there. Give her some money, throw some into the federal government, and she will move heaven and earth to make sure that no entrepreneur can ever pick off Amazon. The regulatory structures, everything else out there, they will make sure that the little guy can never become the big guy, because little guys becoming big guys is worse than having pre-existing big guys who are willing to pay the shakedown money to Congress. The only difference between the socialists in charge of government and the mob is one uses law enforcement in the IRS and the other has Big Louie to break your kneecaps. But it's still a shakedown by the Democrats, and the Fortune 500 is perfectly happy to pay it so long as they get to maintain control of everything. And the Chamber of Commerce itself is much more friendly to stifling innovation and cronyism than it is to anything regarding commerce and innovation. Your local Chamber of Commerce is good. It's the national and the statewide chambers of commerce that are the problem. When your money comes from the Fortune 500 and the Fortune 500 is led by the wokes, guess what the Chamber of Commerce is going to do? Go with the wokes. So what is the solution? On election reform, it's very simple. The Republicans in Georgia need to pass everything in the kitchen sink. Let the court sort it out. I have previously said that the Republicans need to pass reasonable reform that can withstand court challenges, and I've changed my mind. What they need to do is they need to pass everything. They need to pass it and fight it out in court because they got to stand up to the mob. And the way to stand up to the mob is to ignore the slings and arrows and the woke mob and pass everything they can pass, sign it into law, and fight it out in court. What the right has to do is stand up to the left. What the sane people have to do is stand up to the mob. You got to fight the bullies. And one way to do that in election reform is to move forward passing all of these election reforms. So do it now. Do it. Pass them all. Don't even try to be reasonable. Pass what you want to pass. Let the courts sort it out and fight it out in court and take your chances. Because you got to stand up to the wokes. And the only way to stand up to the wokes is to push this stuff through. Stop trying to rein it in and stop trying to be minimal because you're going to be the bad guys anyway. So go for it. Now, let's get to the phones. Henry, calling from Macon. You're going to be up next. If I can click the button there. Henry, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Eric. You actually stole my thunder just now.
Uh-oh.
The question that I had was, give us a game plan. Give the red meat people in the United States a game plan of how to counteract and fight the woke crowd. I work for a Fortune 500 company, and tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we're going to have our diversity and inclusion discussion, and it's going to make me sick to sit there and hold my tongue. So how do we fight without losing our jobs? How do we fight the woke crowd at this level, at the grassroots level? I love what you said. Pass it all. Put everything on the table, pass everything, including the kitchen sink, and fight it out in the courts, because that's the right way to do it. But how does a common man in this country, common woman, stand up to the woke crowd? And regardless of whatever the names may be called, how do we fight?
So, well, one thing, Henry, one thing is the legislatures do have to stand and fight on these issues and push things through. But then I think there are things that you and I can do as well. One of these things is I'm not an advocate of boycotts, but I am an advocate of patronizing businesses that respect our values. You don't have to say I'm not shopping here because they're woke, but you can say I'm shopping here because they respect my values. Another thing that I think we can do is, frankly, outside of businesses, and some can and some can't, is to be frank that this stuff is a lot of hooey. Now, if you're going into your diversity seminar, I don't suggest that's where you do it, but I do suggest you live your life outside the office in a way that reflects this stuff is a bunch of hooey. I also think
the great thing about that, Eric, is I've always done that. Every one of us, regardless of whether we think we are or not, there's some form and some semblance of discrimination, of racial. We look at things that are different from us. And I've tried to live my life without that being a prevailing ideology, so that I do treat everybody nice. And then when you treat me bad, regardless of your ethnicity, then I know to stay away from you.
Right.
So I love that, but we've got to find a way to call this stuff hooey without losing our jobs, without fear of anything bad happening to us. And the only people, this is just one man's opinion, the only people that can do that are, quote unquote, the ethnic minorities in this country, which by the year 2040 or 2050, there will be no ethnic majority in this country.
You're right. Now, I will say this, and I'm looking at the clock, so I got to let you go there. Thank you for the phone call, but I will say this. There are a lot of people who can't stand up and pick these fights, but then there are those of us like me who can. And I can say the things for you that you yourself can't say, and I feel like I got an obligation to do that and to point out the absurdity of it. But also, I think here's the silver lining is I think there is a growing, seething resentment among normal, sane people that this is happening. And they'll vote on it at the ballot box. They'll vote for candidates who oppose it. I think it wins demographically across the board. I think that it's a winning issue. And the fact that the left can't even see it, they're perplexed by all of us calling out these issues. Like the left was saying, the Republicans, they're focused on Dr. Seuss. They're not even focused on the spending package. Yeah. I get that. But I actually think the Dr. Seuss issue is a winning argument because people get freaked out. They're coming for Dr. Seuss. Seriously? They're coming for these childhood icons of mine that are harmless. People get concerned that the censorious nature of the wokes. One thing Americans don't like is to be told what to do. And here come the wokes telling them how they got to live their life. There will be repercussions for the left.
You can follow Erick around social.
I'm so confused. This is perplexing to me. We have some breaking news. I was assured it was a white supremacist who shot up the store in Boulder, Colorado. we have his name. Ahmad al-Alawi Alisa. Ahmad al-Alawi Alisa. That can be the last name we say his name here. Not exactly conforming to the initial narrative. It really is amazing to me how the left now, it's almost predictable that if there's violence in the country, they immediately rush out and say, oh, it's got to be white supremacist. Got to be a Trump supporter. But then there's this as well, and this is very important. What there also is very immediately is a conversation. It's already started. I see it on social media. Well, if he was black, they would have just gunned him down. It's always the white guys who get arrested and taken in peacefully. And you know what? The data doesn't actually back that up. Like the guy in Georgia, they used the pit maneuver to pull him over. They had guns on him, but there actually wasn't any evidence that the guy was treated any differently than anyone else would have been, given how they detained him. And yet the immediate extrapolation is, well, if he was black, he would have been gunned down. How do you know? How do you know? Because the actual evidence out there, and I got to acknowledge, I used to be sympathetic to the argument until I looked at the evidence, and it's not there. Per capita, the evidence that says that, and I used to be so sympathetic to the argument because I've got a lot of friends of mine who they've got, and I've seen it with my own eyes. You're black and want to get a taxi cab, it is a hard thing to do in certain places. I've seen it with my own eyes. And so I was sympathetic to the argument that if this person was black, they would have been gunned down. But, the evidence isn't actually there, and we should make evidence-based arguments. For example, the Federal Bureau of Crime Statistics shows that the preponderance of anti-Asian violence comes from young black men, and it is most overwhelmingly in Northern California. That is where the massive rise in anti-Asian crime is in this country. It's not to say it's not happening elsewhere, but the massive spike in it is there at the hands of young black men more often than not. That's what the evidence says. And so now the left say, well, the evidence has got to be wrong because we just intuitively, we know that there's a problem. Well, you can intuit it all you want, but data is data. Data is not racist. Oh, well, it was a white person who put the data in. This is where your critical theory nonsense comes in, that the data can't be true because the person who did the data entry was white. That's BS argument, and everyone knows it except for the hyper woke. We got to make data-based arguments. And this guy is not a white supremacist, 15. Nor was the shooter in Atlanta. And the rush to make them all about that says more about the people rushing to make it about that than about the shooters themselves.